This video is about what keeps Australia going, not spiritually. That's the movie Red Dog, which was funded by the mining industry. So come to think of it, yeah, in every way, mining.
Literally making Australia a whole.
Let's look at the positives first. It's 10% of Australia's GDP. Reminds me of Perth, and Perth is like opposite land Sydney. No one has any ambition, and as a result, everyone's nice. Might be a survival instinct, as mining is so alpha there that everyone seems to be in some sort of medieval patronage system to this bush pig that ascended to aristocracy by sheer luck. And if it wasn't for mining, what else would hire the people of WA? I don't know how many roadies Kevin Parker needs. I guess some people need to be employed for their thriving tourism industry of people going over. Oh, so that's what a quokka looks like. Probably could have just Googled that, would have saved some money. If it wasn't for mining, I honestly think WA's next dominant industry would be Hungry Jacks. Their footy team is basically just a permanent moving billboard for them. Which, come on, a fast food company sponsoring the peak of athleticism. It's like if cigarettes moved into medical technology.
Try Marlboro's latest line of inhalers. Nicotine option, now available.
Anyway, now that the pros of mining have been dealt with, let's look at the cons. Well, to be fair, in comparison to the long list of pros, the con list is extremely short. In fact, there's one on it, and that is...
resistance is futile.
It is! I'm basically just here to say that everyone who rails against the mining industry with yes, here's how we beat 10% of the GDP by posting infographics on my lunch break while working at BHP. Guys, they clearly won. They won 100 years ago. Every government that has ever taken them on, and there's been a lot of them, they've all discovered that if you're good at digging, your bonus skill is burying. Now, before we begin, you need to understand this, and this is crucial. Any questions? No? We're all up to speed? Good. Now, here's what you actually have to remember. How a nation is founded shapes its destiny. This is why if you ever go to any of those Central Asian horde countries that sprouted guys like Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, you look at their ancient ruined cities, and all of them have some rundown statue of some chief on a horse waving a sword. You go to modern capitals, and it's still some dictator on a horse. And conversely, when you go to France now, the government says, we're changing the bus schedule.
That's it!
This is why you'll never get rid of guns in America. This is why Japan will have that man that's 106 with dementia at the head of Mitsubishi until grim death. It's like shaping cement. Once a country's set, it's set. And Australia set pretty well compared to virtually anywhere else on Earth. I mean, you know, apart from that one flag with the assault rifle on it, they're clearly a paradise. The mining industry can run as much propaganda as it likes that Australia's standard of living is built on minerals, but dude, the Congo has minerals. I'll tell you what the Congo doesn't have. Toilets, probably, but also unions. Unions were right front and centre at the forging of this nation, and that's why in countries like the UK, when they cut back on their wages, their response is basically, right you are, me lord. Whereas here, that's our that's it moment. The reality is, and I really need you to remember this, unions built this country. The mining industry is a parasite that feeds off it. The reason for that is when Australia was being forged, British companies realised, blimey, there's a lot of nickel here, isn't it? And so they flooded the country with private investment to set up the mines, meaning it started in private hands, which means it's going to remain in private hands forever. Oh, what's that? Oh, that's not a nice thought. That makes me feel sad. Yeah, well, so's the heat death of the universe. Still gonna happen. I mean, you can pretend it's not. You can go down the path of the so-called independence, independently regurgitating the same talking points.
Guess who paid more tax on their income last year? You or your gas company? There's a good chance it's you. Most fossil fuel multinationals in Australia paid zero company tax between 2014 and 2020. We have the balance completely wrong when the Australian government collects more money from HECS debts than it does from taxing the income of gas multinationals.
See, that sounds good. Gives you a nice warm feeling with some hard facts that are always taken from the Australia Institute. Always. They never use any other source than a single think tank that totally doesn't have any hidden moneyed interests influencing its work at all. No, they're just there to give off the impression.
It's not rocket science. It's not even brain surgery. We need to strengthen the petroleum resources rent tax. Major parties listen more to fossil fuel companies than they do to everyday Australians. They care more about the next election than the next generation. It's time to reset politics in this country so that it's about people, not about political parties.
Oh, good point. Because it makes me feel good. This is a trope that gets spruiked around a lot.
It's infuriating that the government isn't stepping up on that, and it beggars belief. You know, you think, why aren't you doing this?
Oh, it's just that easy, hey? All we need is the right government in power. I'm assuming one where Monique holds the deciding vote over every decision in the country. That's the right government, is it? Watch that junkie interview. Warning, you'll have suicidal thoughts while doing it, but you'll soon learn that apparently everything you ever wanted was oh so simple. If only Monique was in, and then we'd be taxing the mining companies at 100% and live in an absolute utopia. That's the problem with all these self-anointed truth tellers, telling the hard truths that are extremely digestible to mass audiences. What we actually have had are many governments who have had the guts to take on the mining industry. Tons, including the current Labor government, a fact which is deliberately obfuscated by think tanks and the press. In fact, many of these governments were taking on the mining industry when it had way less power than it does now, and they all got whomped. This is the point of this video. A look at the mining industry's influence on politics throughout history and those who fucked about and subsequently found out. Obviously, Labor Prime Ministers like Chifley and Curtin had a crack, and to be fair, Chifley wasn't buried by the mining industry, he was buried by the banks. Then Menzies got in for about 300 centuries, truly Australia's worm emperor.
No seat shall be safe from my wrath.
When it came to mining, Menzies followed a similar suit to what he did in all other areas of governance. Fuck all. He was followed by Harold Holt, who wasn't buried by the mining industry either. He was drowned, taken down by the biggest opponent of all, oneself. Or the Japs, I don't know. Then Liberal PM John Gorton had a crack? What? Is Friendly Geordie's about to give a positive review of a Liberal Prime Minister? Yes, he is. John Gorton, not only do I really like the shape of his face, doesn't he look like one of these things if it was a pack-a-day smoker? Not only does he deserve credit for taking on the mining industry, he deserves credit for having the smartest idea out of anyone for taking on the mining industry. His policy was pretty much that Futurama joke. And I'll make my own mining industry with no blackjack, and there'll still be hookers. Miners love hookers. It was the Australian Industry Development Corporation, easily the most workable option because it was a fund that would invest in new mining operations, so it wasn't even threatening the profits of existing private mining companies. He was essentially saying, look, you can keep the money from your mines, that's fine. You can even expand them. I don't care. We're just going to set up a government-run mining operation so the people of Australia are getting the money from that. That's a great idea. How much smarter is that than this shitty think tank saying over and over like the kids in the back of a car,
Just tax him! Just tax him!
We already tried that! Shut the fuck up!
What's the bet? Now that we've said that, you can tell that that's going to be the talking point of the guy at lunch trying to sound smart. It'll move from taxing these companies to...
Yeah, like I've always said, you should just set up a public company to compete with the private companies.
It's an awesome idea. Small hitch.
Cooed.
Yep. John Gorton was cooed. Obviously, the mining companies thought, why have a good deal for everyone when we could have an extremely good deal for ourselves? Very similar dynamic to when Malcolm Turnbull wanted to do something on climate change, but was toppled by his own party. Gorton's party forced him to resign on this very point. He barely survived a vote of no confidence and was replaced with Billy Big Ears, whose son was a Hollywood hunk. What? See, this is how ignorant you are of this secret history. You didn't even know that, did you? Look, that's his son. The guy from Nip Tuck. How did a man this ugly produce a man this hot? Obviously, McMahon killed Gorton's idea immediately. After all, that was the whole reason he was there. John Gorton's idea, which I'm not knocking, I honestly think it was a really good idea, but it's obviously far more mild and reasonable than anything those commies over in the Labor Party ever proposed, at least from the mining industry's perspective, of course. And he still got toppled for it. Now keep in mind, that was back when the mining industry had way less power than it does now. Still, cooed. Then in 1972, the newly elected Labor Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, confirmed that the Australian minerals industry was heavily dominated by foreign interests that use a myriad of strategies to avoid taxes and siphon funds out of the country. I've got my own tax avoiding strategy.
You're not taking me down, tax man! You're not taking me down!
So in response, Gough Whitlam proposed to establish a Commonwealth-owned body called the Petroleum and Minerals Authority, which would give greater control of mining exploration projects and development to the Australian people. Famous last words. The mining industry and their puppets in the coalition immediately attacked the proposed authority, describing it the same way they described free school lunches in Queensland.
Communism. Look, straight out of the teachings of Mayor. Step 1, own mines, not libtards. Step 2, deny your child's right to go to school hungry.
You can look at our video here for how Whitlam was absolutely cooed by the USA, and the biggest reason they decided to coup him, daring to nationalise the mines. You know that myth you learned at school that, oh, he was dismissed because the Senate blocked supply. Yeah, but supply of what? Because I know there's some smartasses watching this now. No. One of the handful of bills blocked was that which would have started nationalising the mines, and it was blocked by the crossbench. You see how necessary independents and minor parties are to a healthy democracy? Why do you think millionaires fund the campaigns of these truth-telling independents and minor parties? So they can call in favours. It's because, just in case Labor comes up with one of its trademark shit-light ideas, like trying to nationalise the mines, the good old crossbench is there to hold them to account. Why, if it wasn't for the crossbench, the state governments of Queensland, West Australia, Victoria, the New South Wales government, all Liberal governments, what a surprise, wouldn't have had the time to flood the High Court with appeals who ultimately ruled that Labor's resource bill contravened Section 57 of the Australian Constitution. You know what that means? Of course not. No one does. Except, of course, maybe this sovereign citizen here. That man obviously understands the Constitution very well. In the simplest terms possible, this bill was rejected because the required 3 months the House of Representatives had to wait to try and pass the bill after the Senate had first rejected it hadn't passed. What a very specific and bullshit detail to pounce on for such a consequential bill. The High Court must have had some true patriots railguarding against this big government tyrannical nightmare world of being able to afford a fucking bullet train to the Gold Coast. Lucky for us, they did. Among the 4 of the 6 judges that ruled that the proposed bill was unconstitutional, 5 out of 6 were appointed by Liberal governments. Among them was Sir Anthony Mason and the Chief Justice Sir Garfield Barwick, who wasn't only appointed by a Liberal government, but was a former Liberal government minister. Oh, I wonder if he was one of the 2 judges that voted in favour of Labor's bill, eh? Especially when both these men later provided advice to Sir John Kerr that he had the power to sack Whitlam. But the question still remains, how did they vote? Oh. Anyway, let's just pause for a moment and truly appreciate just how much power the mining industry has. Even when the elected federal government is outwardly hostile to them, doesn't matter. Because they've got the courts, the majority of the Senate, thanks to the oh-so-necessary crossbench, of course, the choice of government for fuckheads who think that that's some sort of middle finger to the system when in reality it's its final defence. The mining industry had the majority of states on their side, and if that wasn't enough states, they also had the US State Department on their side too. You're starting to see how dumb the whole, oh, we just need the right government in power argument is? Even when you have, quote, the right government in power, which I can assure you wouldn't have a fucking teal anywhere near it, guess what? The mining industry is still in power. And guess what else? That was back when it had even less power than it does now. Because after that, Fraser came in, yet another Liberal who knew exactly why he was there, returned the favour in kind, slashing levies on coal and oil production and accelerating tax write-offs on mining exploration. The biggest one of all was devaluing the Australian dollar by 17.5%, which fucked the rest of Australia's economy so badly, in fact, that it created economic conditions economists previously thought were impossible. And why? Because the now defunct mining companies, CRA and Broken Hill South, as well as the president of the Australian Mining Industry Council, so all the private-run mines, pressured the Fraser government to move ahead with the devaluation to increase their exports. Once again, the supposed party of superior economic managers greatly damaged the Australian economy for the benefit of a few mining companies. Not good. Don't you reckon that last sentence? Perfect summary of the Liberal Party, isn't it? In fact, Fraser screwed up the Australian economy so badly that the business community had to allow an actual government, which is a perfect summary of the Labor Party, isn't it? Labor under Bob Hawke, the guy on the beer can. Isn't it sad that there's a bunch of Dropkick Zoomers watching this? It's him! It's fucking him! He introduced the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax, exactly what the Australia Institute always pretends is oh so easy to do. Just do it on gas. Just do the same thing with gas. The only reason politicians wouldn't do it with gas is because all politicians are corrupt and take money from gas. Ooh. You gonna reveal your funding, Australia Institute? Just asking. Sure, there's nothing compromising there. After all, you're the good guys. Guess what happened in the real world? The petroleum industry launched a protracted PR campaign immediately, producing a publication entitled The Case Against a Resource Tax in Australia, powered by Esso. Fuck, that publication had its own West Coast Eagles Hungry Jack sponsor, didn't it?
And just as hard hitting.
No, obviously it was like Dutton's nuclear plan. Complete and utter bullshit that was instantly ripped apart, but does that matter? No, why would it matter? Who needs facts when you've got cash? Like me, for instance, explaining why we are where we are. This video will reach a few 100,000 people. The lies these people routinely tell will reach a few million, and the lies these people tell will reach a few tens of millions. Cash beats facts every time. Esso, BHP Billiton, and the Australian Petroleum Production and Expansion Association, now known as the Australian Energy Producers, put advertisements in newspapers pretending that the report raised some good points. Esso then got the Liberals and Nationals to withdraw their support of Bob Hawke's petroleum tax, and that Right there is why when you hear independents like Monique Ryan bring up the same tired Australia Institute talking points over and over again that Qatar gets more money for its resources than we do, without ever mentioning that Qatar is a dictatorship. As you can plainly see from both the Gordon and Whitlam example, Australia is not.
Cood.
Just in case you forgot. If Goff's name was Sheikh Al Ahal Whitlam, yeah, we could probably do what Qatar does. But a Prime Minister's office doesn't hold the same clout as being supremely picked by Allah, and these guys pretending that it is shows how truly dishonest they are. It's honestly like if the Australia Institute started arguing, during times of natural disaster, North Korea diverts half its population to the prevention effort. Australia could be doing the same during bushfire season. Why isn't it? Corruption, that's why. Yeah, you're omitting some glorious points about the fatherland there, comrade. Less dumb, but way more scummy is to pretend that Norway can do it, so can we. In Norway, both their version of the Liberal Party and their version of the Labour Party support high resource taxes. You see a bit of a difference between here and there? In Norway, these private companies have nowhere to go. Neither party is going to significantly lower their taxes, therefore high taxes has bipartisan support. Here, the mining industry, as we showed with the leaked mining industry Christmas party when you had Peter Dutton grovelling to Gina saying, quote,
"A Dutton coalition government will be the best friend the resource sector in Australia will ever have."
That is why we can't be like Norway. It's the same reason that it's hard for us to touch housing tax loopholes. It's the same reason you can't tax carbon emissions. Once one side of government says, nope, as soon as we get in, we're gonna sink it, guess what? Those powerful lobbies pump the coalition with money so they get elected to repeal those taxes. Watch the leaked mining video. This is not a conspiracy. They just don't tell you this publicly. Just like these people don't tell you everything else that we're telling you in this video publicly because it's not in their political interests. What is in their political interest is grand empty words that they know they will never have to deliver on, but can forever cynically dangle these keys in front of Zoomers for cheap votes because they're too young to even remember when Kevin Rudd tried to tax minerals, forever pretending, oh, it's just so easy, kids. This thing that has been tried many times before, where the only thing that's changed is if we go back to Hawke's petroleum tax, as Dr. Diane Crowell points out, a specialist of taxation law at Monash University. She correctly pointed out that the minerals lobby would respond in exactly the same way when Kevin Rudd would try to introduce this tax on minerals as they did to Bob Hawke. You see how much of a lie it is, this whole you can tax the mining industry like they do in Qatar? They have crushing opposition down to a recipe book now. It's not simple to just tax them. What is simple is removing any government that does try to tax them. That's what's changed. After Howard came in, much like his hero Menzies, did absolutely nothing, let the mining boom pass by, squandering the little amount of money we got on shitty middle class welfare like private school handouts that are also impossible to reverse now for similar reasons, $80 billion in the span of 10 years, yet only $9 billion flowed into the national coffers. The Rudd government proposed the resource super profits tax of 40% on mining companies so we could at least catch the tail end of the mining boom. Now, I must point out a few things here. This was a proposed tax on profits above $50 million. It was specifically designed not to burden small mining operations so they couldn't run the whole
You're killing small businesses, those that make 49 million a year
line. Of course they did anyway, along with running the same playbook they did under Hawke, because remember, it's a recipe now. The Minerals Council of Australia, BHP Billiton and Rio Tinto, among others, were quick to launch a multi-pronged scare campaign, $100 million worth of it, a pittance of the $50 billion Rudd was trying to make them pay. You see why it's impossible to marshal a response to this shit? Even if you came up with $100 million to counteract their $100 million in ads, they could just spend $1 billion in ads. Even if you came up with $1 billion, they could spend $10 billion. Why not? They're still saving $40 billion. It honestly astonishes me how, when you try to explain all of this to people, they'll always turn around and say, oh, well, Labor just needs to explain themselves better. You see? You see how the inherent frame the public always has, and this is because they're indoctrinated with this. It's always the politician's fault. All the time, even when the public is admitting that the politicians are on their side trying to help them.
Nah, it's still their fault for not trying to help me hard enough in a way that I can clearly understand.
What do you do?
Fuck all. Oh, I whinge on Facebook sometimes, actually.
How are you ever supposed to communicate well enough in a completely rigged media system? What? Kevin Rudd was supposed to be better at communicating than all of these moneyed interests on media platforms completely hostile to him. Here's an example. The mining company Xstrata started crying poor. Oh, we don't have enough money to invest in the Ernest Henry copper mine. The taxes are so crushing. We're plebs without a Robin Hood. And Kevin Rudd, worst communicator on earth apparently, pointed out that Xstrata was actually shelving those projects before he announced his tax for a myriad of logistical issues. But again, Who needs facts when you've got cash? You have the press pumping that same narrative day and night, thousands of voices versus Kevin Rudd. Oh, well, they can't be all wrong, can they? And that's just the ground game. Then, as has happened numerous times in our history, Kevin Rudd was cooed. You can tell that he was cooed because, like Gordon, like Whitlam, his replacement's first action was in her first speech as Prime Minister.
Today, I am throwing open the government's door to the mining industry, and I ask that in return, the mining industry throws open its mind. And today, I will ensure that the mining advertisements paid for by the government are cancelled. And in return for this, I ask the mining industry to cease their advertising campaign as a show of good faith and mutual respect.
She weakened the tax to the point that mining companies thought, fuck, it's cheaper to pay the tax than it is to continue running the scare campaign. It ended up bringing in not $50 billion, maybe might have scraped $300 million. And none of these tactics even hold a candle to the primary weapon mining companies have at their disposal, which is dark money. You could see this in effect in the last Queensland election, where Labor was taxing coal and using that money to build Queensland one of the cheapest, cleanest, most modern electric grids in the world, as well as give Queenslanders some of the best cost of living relief on earth during the cost of living crisis. And they lost. Because of a crime wave, even though youth crime was down under them. Ooh, better get them out before it turns into a tsunami, am I right? What really happened? The press, who are as pro-mining industry as you can get, didn't report on the fact that Labor was taxing coal for the public's benefit and instead showed carjackings from day dot till election day. They essentially invented a reason for the public to vote the government out, never telling the public the real reason why. This is how dark money works. It funds a bunch of campaigns that have nothing to do with the reason you're funding these campaigns. The mining industry is not going to come out and say,
Stephen Miles thinks you should have money for your resources. What? He even thinks you should have cheaper electricity bills from a source of energy that isn't mined out of the ground, so we can't profit off it. What a fuckhead.
They just say he's soft on crime, and that's all they say. We'll never know how much the mining industry spent on that election. That's how dark money works. But they definitely were spending. 1.5 million had been donated to third-party groups involved in the Queensland election by coal mining interests, and that's only what was reported on. You had BHP chucking an extrata. Oh, we're going to be looking into investments in Chile and Canada now because of the crippling coal tax. Ooh, gives the media the line to run always of,
this government's killing jobs.
even though that government has created more jobs than any other state government in that time frame. But again, you don't mention that. You see how it's the same playbook? They were even so bold, as soon as the Labor Party was booted out of office in Queensland, Q Coal patted itself on the back, publicly congratulating itself on successfully rolling every single sitting Labor MP they targeted, bar one. That's how you know they were spending a little more than 1.5 million. Both Q Coal and the Queensland Resources Council were very quick to congratulate David Crisafulli and announce that they were looking forward to a fruitful relationship with the newly elected LNP government, which I'm absolutely sure it will be. Why are we going through all of this? To give you the context that you are never given in these shitty, misleading infographics. To point out that the reason we don't have a tax on resources is not because every politician is corrupt and doing deals with the mining industry. It's because it has been definitively proven you can't. They will get their preferred government elected, and then not only do you not have no money coming in from resources, you have every government department cut back to the point of it being inept. As Peter Dutton proudly pointed out, behind closed doors, you'll have all the environmental regulations Labor put on them, and even better, actually enforced, ignored. You have the dozens of examples of coalition MPs using their office for self-enrichment and giving their mates fat government contracts at highly inflated prices. You have terrible economic management, no action on climate change, and this is the big part, this is the reason they are openly stating in their Christmas party that they want the Labor government out, so they can continue to avoid paying the taxes they owe. As stated before, Labor is leading the world in clamping down on tax evasion. That is a bigger fight anyway, and this has resulted in Labor taxing these companies 5 times more than they were being taxed under the coalition when they scrapped Labor's last mining tax. Again, something you will never ever hear in the press because they're either all pro the Liberals or all pro the Liberal lights, aka the crossbench. This is not convenient to their shitty shit and shit light argument. So, like crime statistics, It's ignored. And the biggest reason of all that they want Labor out, and this is something that Dutton touched on in his touching tribute to Gina Rinehart, that Gina was obviously too dumb to figure out herself. But hey, that's why they can pay for the experts. What Labor is planning to do now is the John Gorton special, except even smarter, because this is what people do when they're actually interested in finding solutions for the country as opposed to self-advancement like the crossbench are. You know how we were saying that John Gorton's plan was to try and build a public mining company and even that got shut down? Labor's plan is, guys, sell the minerals to us. That's right. We're going to make Australia a Japan instead of just a big pit. That's Labor's Future Made in Australia plan, and if we had anything resembling a fair media, that would be touted as the most consequential policy since Reconstruction after the war, because this is going to make Australia a clean energy superpower where blue-collar jobs are highly skilled and therefore highly paid. And this is the Liberals' biggest nightmare, highly unionised. They're trying to make Australia a manufacturing superpower for the green tech future. One day I'll go into it in much further detail, but for now, I want you to remember this. Losers fight battles that are already lost. Winners look for new battlegrounds.